I have a degree in cyber defense, which you may be thinking, what? Cyber defense? I didn't know that was a thing. It's because it's brand new. It's cutting edge.
Brand spanking
It's
new.
pretty much the latest thing you can get as
You
far
were
as
the first
technology goes.
gen.
Actually, I was the first one from my school to graduate with that degree.
Hell yeah.
I stayed an extra year to get it. But anyway, I've been working in IT for 16 years. My entire career, ever since my first job, I've been working in IT
Hell yeah.
in various industries across public, private, healthcare, retail, education. I've worked in all of those places, and I now own my own consulting business where I do cybersecurity. That is my day job. I am a cybersecurity expert.
He's in.
I want to preface this with that so that you understand my qualifications and you understand where I'm coming from when I break this stuff down, because I'm not coming at this from an angle of I hate Trump or I love Trump.
Yeah.
It's nothing like that. This is a purely objective viewpoint of what this guy is presenting.
Okay.
So Mike Lindell provided this video, and he claims that this is absolute proof of election fraud.
Oh, absolute. We're going with that, huh?
Yeah, no, absolute proof. And
okay, Mike Lindell, that's a tough nugget to crack, but let's do it.
in this hour-and-a-half long documentary that Mike Lindell provides on his website, michaeljlindell.com,
Okay.
he interviews various people and evaluates different fraud claims of the election. But the one that he ends it with, kind of the crescendo, if you will, is this data, quote-unquote, data from voting machines. Or we don't really know where this data is from, but we're presented with a spreadsheet, a data form, report of different IP addresses and how Trump votes were changed and things like that. So we're going to evaluate this. Let's go through. We'll start in this particular section of the video, and we will listen to what they say, and then I'm going to go ahead and give you my perspective on whether this is real or what the real deal is here.
And then I'll be here to just give some stupid, funny commentary.
You can ask questions because
And ask questions.
because the expert is now in the house.
Okay.
Let's go.
We've been watching cybersecurity experts, and they've explained some of the things that happened in the election, some of the election fraud. But what we're seeing here is, if you look at this chart, is that there were cybersecurity experts who began collecting information on November 1st. And so this was before, during, and after the election, that they were collecting documentation. In fact, they collected terabytes of information that document the election fraud, the foreign intrusion into our election.
Wow. So initial thoughts. I mean, as an average person watching this, you're probably thinking, wow, there's a lot of technical information on there.
Yep. It's a lot of mumbo jumbo. I don't understand.
I'm seeing words like firewalls and credentials and IP addresses and things like that. And this chick, whoever she is, she's saying there's election fraud. This was a cyber attack. She used that word cyber attack over and over, which was a little cyber intrusion, I think was the word she used.
Another buzzword.
Well, it's not really a word that's used in the industry, cyber intrusion. Initially, I could tell right off the bat by the usage of that phrase.
You're kind of like,
she doesn't really know what she's...
Doesn't seem like she's talking about.
That was my first hint that she doesn't really know what she's talking about. But
sounds like some old lady in her basement.
Well, let's continue on and see. Maybe she's got some more credibility that she's hiding behind the scenes
Actually,
here.
she doesn't even know how to turn on a computer.
In 95 counties in the United States. This was collected in real time. All right, so if you go to the chart, what you will see is a documentation of foreign interference in the election. The first column...
That doesn't make sense right there. I've got red flags going off immediately.
How did you...
She says, what you see is a documentation of foreign interference in our election.
Where?
Okay, we'll get back to that. I just wanted to point out that was a red flag.
Okay.
If you look at the chart, that shows that on 11/5/2020, at 7:43 and 38 seconds, we had a foreign intrusion, and it shows the IP address, the Internet Protocol address. That is the number of that protocol address of the hacker that entered into our election. The second column is the owner or source of that IP address. That shows that ChinaNet in Beijing province entered the election. It shows an ID. That is the unique address of a computer. That shows the exact computer using that IP source that entered into our election.
Do you notice how she keeps repeating this phrase, entering our election?
Yeah,
and
she just keeps pushing it like...
Her verbiage is very strange. It's as if it's another red flag for me, is just the verbiage and the way she talks about this.
The next is the target. That's the IP target. That's the Internet Protocol address of the target. All right? Then the next is the target state. In this case, it shows that it's Michigan.
Okay.
Where in Michigan? That's the next column. It shows that it's in Emmett County, Michigan. Then the ID target. That is the unique address of another computer in the United States that the hacker has gone into. And then it shows the method of intrusion.
Okay.
Now, on some cases, you're going to see that they use credentials. That means that they have fake credentials because there were administrators that had been placed on the Secretary of State's computers.
Okay. So she said they're administrator credentials. All right.
False administrators. In other cases, it shows that they broke through the firewall. In some cases, they did both. Now, in the next column, it shows whether it was successful. You'll see a Y. That shows that, yes, it was successful. Now, oftentimes, they're not successful, and they have to go back and try for another intrusion, and then it shows whether that's, in fact, successful as well. Then in the final column, what you're seeing are votes changed. Now, in this particular case, when they went into Emmett County, Michigan, the votes that were changed was they stole 3,477 votes from Donald Trump. That's what you're looking at. Now, as you go through this document and you look at all the multiple intrusions into our election, what you'll notice that over 60% of these intrusions come from China.
Okay. All right. So we let her do her thing. We let her explain what you're looking at. So I gave her fair.
Give her fair fair time.
Exactly. Gave her a fair time. So now, let's take a little bit closer of a look at this.
Luna, you're right, says, I have to say, so far this little lady is still convincing to me.
So that's the thing. Now, if a normal person's seeing this, and the reason I came across this is because somebody sent this to me and they asked me what the feasibility of this is. Because to a normal person, this probably looks legit. You're looking at it and you're like, man, there's a lot of technical information here. Now, think about it. Okay, one thing I got to say is cybersecurity is like magic.
A little bit.
It's magic because nobody knows how it works.
I don't.
Except for the people like me. So just look at me as Gandalf the Brown.
Okay.
Okay, because I still have brown hair.
Okay.
And let me interpret the wizardry and the magic that you think you're seeing.
Okay.
But you have to acknowledge that this is magic.
Oh, it definitely is.
And that you don't know how magic works.
You guys are sorcerers for sure.
That's
why
what I'm
I
saying.
call you the techno wizard.
The average person has no idea what this is. So they see things that are technical like this, and they think that it looks real. They think it looks credible. But I'm going to break this down here from a cybersecurity
My eyes definitely gloss over when they start talking about this.
Yeah, let me. We'll go through this in. Give you the cybersecurity expert's perspective on this. My initial thoughts on this is that it's entirely BS, and I'm going to point out a few reasons why. This might get a little. I'm not going to make it too technical. Don't worry, guys. I'm going to make it fun and interactive. Okay.
Yeah.
So she talks about how we have dates, we have IP sources, owner source, which is very. So this is a very simple thing. You could take any IP address like they have right there, 220.181.132.198, and you can search that online. And it will tell you what company owns that IP address.
Okay.
What internet service provider owns that IP address. And I went through and I spot checked these, and they are accurate. So that 220.181, that is a Chinese IP address.
Okay.
But she says that these are intrusions coming from China. One thing you have to understand about internet and IP protocol is that any number of these communications can be routed through any country that you want.
Yes.
It would take me approximately 40 seconds for me to get on my laptop right here and make it look like I'm coming from Russia, make it look like I'm coming from China, from any country that I want.
Yeah, can't you just like change out what server you're using, which country and servers you're using and shit?
Just a VPN.
Yeah, your VPN.
Just seeing that the source is coming from China, some Chinese company, doesn't tell you that that's what the actual source is.
It's coming from a Chinese service, maybe, but
yeah, and I want to draw your attention to this column right here.
Okay.
This column ID source. This column makes absolutely no sense. First of all, ID source is not a technical term.
okay.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's ID source. That is not a term that any cybersecurity expert will ever use. ID source. What this really is, this is a MAC address. So MAC address is a unique identifier to every every computer has a unique MAC address.
Okay.
And the first section of every MAC address,
It's like their DNA.
this first three parts here, that's actually a vendor identification code.
Okay.
So every MAC address, you can link back to a vendor. You can tell who manufactured whatever device that you're connecting from.
Their VIC.
NIC, actually.
NIC?
Network interface card.
Okay.
So a network interface card
Cute,
has a MAC address. So if you were to Google this MAC address, you could find out what manufacturer this MAC address is from.
Okay.
Problem is, well, there's two problems. First problem is MAC addresses are not viewable or available over the internet.
Yeah, I was
When
going to say, isn't that like private, really private?
It's a local, well, to keep the magic as simple as possible for you guys, it's a local internet protocol where when my computer is communicating with another computer on my network at home, my cell phone knows the MAC of my laptop when I'm on the same network. But my cell phone does not know the MAC of the devoting machine in another country.
Okay.
That's not transmitted over the internet. It's not possible to get that information.
Yeah.
So the existence of this column in and of itself
is
a huge red flag. That makes
Okay.
absolutely no sense. There is no such thing as an ID source, first of all. It's called a MAC address. And secondly, the MAC address is not available over the internet. You cannot get the MAC address of the source in Russia via a communication that happened over the internet. That's not how that works. I got to really emphasize this point. The existence of that column ID source, first of all, they're trying to pass it off as a MAC address, but secondly, the MAC address is not even readable over the internet. That alone discredits this entire document. There was no really any more reason for me to continue on and evaluate any more red flags with this, but I will anyway, just to give you a complete picture of what's really all going on with this and what's wrong here. I want to pause this video right here and actually walk you through an exercise that you can do yourself right now on your computer to demonstrate what I'm talking about with these MAC addresses. So if you're on a Windows machine, go to your Start menu and run command prompt. But you can open that by typing CMD and then opening the command prompt here. Once you're in the command prompt, type ipconfig, all one word, space, /all, just like this. Press enter, and it's going to give you all the information regarding your network interface cards. You'll see right here that I'm using it for my Ethernet adapter, where I connect hardline into my router. I have a physical address. This is your MAC address of that adapter. You have the information right here. Now, I can copy this into any Mac lookup tool online, and it will tell me who the manufacturer of my card is, because these are universal codes that are available for anyone who tries to manufacture devices. They're put into an IEEE database. This is where all the standards are tracked for any electronic communications devices. Let's go up here into the, I'm just going to copy the first three to drill my point home here into the MAC address lookup tool. I'm using maclookup.app. If I paste that in, press search, just the first three is enough for this to know that this is a MicroStar board. It was developed this is where the city is registered to do business in. So now the reason I point this out is because I spot checked a handful of the quote unquote MAC addresses, which again aren't real MAC addresses, from the report provided by Mike Lindell's team, and none of them show up in this tool. So I encourage you, go through the list, copy some of the MAC addresses from that report into one of these tools online, and see if anything actually comes up, because they didn't for me, which leads me, again, it's probably the third or fourth clue that this entire column is just entirely BS.
So that column is fake news.
The whole entire column is fake news as far as I can tell. I don't know. Now, the second thing I want to point out here is look up in the top right-hand corner. We have this document is titled U.S. Election Fraud 2020, Foreign Interference, U.S. Counties, Preliminary Data. Yeah, trust
Preliminary.
me. Seems very preliminary. But in a report like this, in a cybersecurity environment, you would be expecting to see more details. Now, this might be something akin to an executive level report, where anybody who's worked in the corporate world, you'll know executive reports are very dumbed down versions of reports that don't have as much technical information.
Yes.
The best case scenario that I can give to this is that this is like some kind of executive level report that is missing a lot of critical information, because the first thing that I think as a cybersecurity expert when I'm presented with this data is, where did this come from? Where was this data generated from? Because in the cybersecurity world, this is how cybersecurity works. Every organization, corporation, government, whatever it is, they have a assortment of different tools that they use to protect themselves and to prevent attackers from getting in. They have firewall tools. They have endpoint protection tools like antivirus. They have vulnerability management tools. They have data loss prevention tools. They have threat intelligence tools. They have incident response tools. And all those tools can generate different kinds of data. When you're typically talking about log data, which is what they're trying to present this as, it's coming from one of those tools. It could come from Windows. It could come from the proprietary tool. In this case, it might be Dominion or something like that. But again, let's say best case scenario, this is coming from a Dominion server of some kind. What you're missing here, again, the second thing that as a cybersecurity expert I would be questioning is there's no model number information for anything on here. So do you think that they use the same exact voting machines in Michigan as they do in Georgia and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, even though those contracts were signed in different years and by different people? And that's assuming that all these are actually using like Dominion machines, which they may not be. They may be using different manufacturers. So that leads me into another key point. The fact that this is missing source data, it's missing manufacturer, it's missing model data. We'd have to know what kind of models and machines is it coming from, because what they talk about is intrusion methods. Now, if we go back here and just fast forward the video a little bit to a new screenshot where they have this other right-hand column that says method of intrusion. This is
method of intrusion.
This is another one of those columns that doesn't make any sense to me. And any cybersecurity expert, you'd get a major red flag on this one. Major red flag. So let me highlight this here. We're looking at this column right here, method of intrusion. They only have two things here. It's either nothing, which is a question mark. What does that mean? How did they
have nothing?
How did they do it if there's no method? Or maybe they don't know. That's a fine. So we'll leave that out. But they only have two other options. It's credentials or firewall.
Or both.
Or both. So you heard the lady mention that the firewalls were breached. That's not a real thing.
It's not?
It's not a real thing. A firewall is either open or it's closed. Now, that brings me back to a previous point that I missed completely. So third thing that a cybersecurity expert would red flag when they look at this is this IP target column right here. IP target. Okay, cybersecurity experts, the IP itself is not very relevant. We don't really care about the IP, okay? I'm telling you this as somebody who has responded to massive incidents in huge consequential environments where people's lives are at stake because it's a healthcare environment and biomed devices can be attacked.
Oh, wow.
This column is missing a critical piece of information, and if you're familiar with this, you might know what I'm talking about. It's missing the port.
Port? Question mark?
There's no port here.
Looks like
port. The port. Just ignore that. It says port. Okay, it's missing the port. The port is kind of a mailbox, if you will, for a computer. It's different protocols, different services communicate on different ports, and a port that something comes across tells me vastly more information than I would learn from the IP address itself. The IP address, again, useless. If I know that something's coming in on port 80, I know it's coming in over the HTTP protocol, which means that it's likely an attack being carried out via your web browser, or port 80 is often open because it's needs to be open for web communications to open web pages and things like that. If it's coming across port 443, I know it's SSH, encrypted traffic. If it's coming across 8839 or 3389, then I know it's remote desktop protocol, which is a commonly exploited one. So that's the point. The point that I'm making is that
the port is
very
important.
Tells you how it's being attacked.
Yes.
The fact they don't have that in here is a major red flag, and it tells me that this document probably wasn't either created or digested by quote-unquote cybersecurity experts like she says. So, red flag. Let's get back to the method of intrusion. Now that we know about the port, they say firewall. For those who don't know, all a firewall does is it either blocks or allows connections from an IP address and or a port combination. So I could say block Delaney on port 80. Delaney can get in at any other port she wants, but she's blocked on 80. That's all a firewall does. So when they say they breach the firewall, okay, that can mean only one thing in my mind. As a cybersecurity expert, that means that a firewall was open on certain ports. You don't breach it though. You just walk right in. I'm not scaling the wall. I'm not.
Similar to the politicians whose Twitters get hacked.
Yes, right. They got hacked.
Same
Right.
thing.
Exactly. It's wide open. You can
It's
just
wide
walk
open.
right in.
Somebody just found an open window.
That's what breaching a firewall means.
That means that somebody found an open window somewhere.
Exactly. Somebody forgot to close the window, and somebody came in through the window.
Burglar came in and found and pounced.
Now, if that's true in this case, all the other things aside, a firewall breach would mean negligence.
Yeah.
That would mean this was not configured
you need
properly.
to hire Jeremy.
that would mean that somebody came in and actually changed the firewall from the baseline, the default that it was actually set up in, because these devices are not set up by default to communicate on the internet, which is another red flag.
So bad
that,
setup.
That you guys are probably already aware. Even a normal person could think to themselves, why would a voting machine be connected to the internet? Exactly. Now, I have to pause and elaborate a little bit further here on this point, because people will tell me, but Jeremy, we've had affidavits signed by people who said they've seen machines connected via a cable to the internet. First of all, connecting via cable doesn't necessarily mean it's connected to the internet. You connect it to a local area network with the cable. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's connected to the internet. Secondly, connecting it via a cable to for example, an open internet port on a router, like a public router or whatever it is that they're connecting to in the voting place, doesn't automatically mean that it's accessible from the internet, because you would have to go in and manually configure, as I mentioned, the firewall to allow those communications. So there's several variables involved. It would all have to be lined up in order for somebody to successfully connect from the internet publicly to these machines and then change the votes, which would again require some manual intervention by somebody who has the vendor credentials, which the voting volunteers would not have. It would need to be somebody from the manufacturer of the voting machine, which we can go back to the discussion about there's no manufacturer information, there's no vendor information, there's no model information. These are all likely different models, which would imply that different companies were all providing different admin level credentials to all these devices in different states and different counties. Again, very far-fetched coincidence. Overall point being that there would have to be many variables all lined up perfectly in order to allow somebody to connect remotely from the internet on these things. It's not just a matter of connecting it with a cable to the internet. They aren't. By default, they are not. They operate on local area networks only. They do not connect to outside networks.
So that way aren't these things happening.
Exactly. They operate. They come into a voting location. They set up the infrastructure. It all operates on an internal local area network that does not communicate with the internet. And then they can do everything they need to, and then report out the results.
Yes.
That's how this stuff works.
Rob B says, "I'm ready for a glass of port." Yuck. Disgusting.
So, okay, continuing on from that. So now that we know the firewall thing makes no sense, and breaching a firewall is not actually a real thing. The second thing in here is credentials. Credentials means what? It means I log in as Jeremy at weeklynarrative.com, and then I put my password in. The fact they have credentials in here means either one of two things. It means the manufacturer has default credentials on these devices that was not changed, which is a major red flag. Again, gross negligence. Probably somebody would go to jail for that. Yeah. Another quick pause here on this point. These devices all go through testing and evaluation processes, which with the localities in the states that they are operating in way before these elections even happen. And cybersecurity experts look at these machines, and one of the things that they look for specifically is that they are configured by default to not allow internet connections. So you can go through you can probably look up, they're all public. You can go to your state and look up these evaluation and the examination reports for these machines, and you can see cybersecurity experts writing in paper, signing that these are configured to not allow connections from any external sources. The point that I'm making here is that these would have to be manually reconfigured with the vendor credentials if this was even going to be possible, and that would have to happen between the point in time when they were evaluated by the state and implemented for these voting times. Second possibility is somebody set up credentials ahead of time in order to be used for this. Now, again, I'm bringing this back to the models discussion and the vendor discussion. You can't breach credentials in Arizona and Georgia and Pennsylvania unless they were either all from the same vendor and all had the same default credentials that all weren't changed, which the possibility of that happening is like next to zero.
Yeah.
Or these are different vendors with different machines, and then those are different default credentials that weren't changed, even less of a possibility.
Yeah.
Or somebody was in each of those states and set up credentials to be used and then handed them off to somebody else.
They had an inside man.
Yeah, like an inside man situation, exactly. And that is even more far-fetched. So those are the three possibilities for the credentials intrusion option, which doesn't make any sense, especially when you consider that these aren't even connected to the internet in the first place, or they shouldn't be. The fact that they're even connected to the internet at all would be a major red flag that could get people fired. If you connect the voting machine to the internet when by default it's not allowed to be connected to the internet, means you have to go in and change something to allow it to connect. That's gross negligence. That would get you fired. Anybody who did that would get fired, or I don't know what kind of legal ramifications would be in place for that. But first of all, it's not possible. It would require manual change to even allow it to be possible, and it would kind of imply there's some major conspiracy because they're saying that's happening across multiple states.
Yeah.
Okay, so log trace. Let's look at this column right here. Log trace. What does this mean? Log trace means that there's logs of the events that took place. So in the computer world, in the cybersecurity world,
There's always a log of something.
you cannot hide from anything.
I know.
Every single thing that you do is if
logged.
you're on a corporate environment where you have all those tools, as I mentioned, monitoring everything that you're doing, everything is
Every
logged.
keystroke is logged.
Everything is logged. And so they say, log trace, yes, on these. But then they say log trace no on some of these, like down here. I circled the wrong one. My calibration on my pen is a little off. They say no down here for log trace no. But we're looking at the logs. This is a log entry. These are all log entries. What you're looking at is basically log entries. But then they say they have no log entries for this. So how do they know that votes were changed? If there is no log entries, how do they know what IP it came from?
How do they know that how do they know the log is there if there's no log? Why are they saying that there's a log if there's an N? Like
you wouldn't
there
know.
should be all Y's there, no N's.
Exactly. Yeah. This information is log information, so they either don't know what this column really means, or they're just bullshitting completely.
I think this whole thing is bullshit.
I'll let you come to their own conclusions. I'm just the expert here, okay?
I think there's a little bit of truth, or like there's like bits of truth to what they're saying. It's just the way that they're presenting it when you dissect it with somebody like you.
See, this is it gets even better. So now we have a column like this right here, where it says Georgia.
Okay.
And it says log trace no, success no, method of intrusion not listed, but it says Trump votes were changed by 18,000.
Huh.
So if it was successful, no, not successful, but Trump votes were changed.
What? That's
Yes, exactly. What is the only proper response to that? What does that even mean?
So why is it even there?
But they also don't have logs for it. So
yeah, they don't have log for it. So
they don't know what happened.
They don't know what happened, but they know
But
what
we do know what happened because we do have logs, but we don't have logs at the same time. So the point that I'm trying to make with this particular argument is that this is not the caliber of document that any cybersecurity expert would ever take seriously. This is a joke. Even as something that would be what I would classify as an executive level document, which is a dumbed down, summarized, high level version of a document.
It's a document that I can try to understand.
Exactly. This doesn't even pass for that.
Yeah.
It doesn't even meet that standard. It's the technical definitions, the technical knowledge that's missing. This definitely probably was not created by a cybersecurity professional. It definitely wasn't reviewed by one, and it definitely was not presented to anyone as the final recipient of it. She uses all the wrong terminology like cyber intrusion.
Kind of sounds like a leftist.
It's just a breach. It's a breach. If you're in the industry and you're familiar with industry knowledge and terms, you just call stuff a breach. That's all it is. It's a breach. And the IP target, the ID target and stuff like that, it's not even a real thing. Method of intrusion, you don't breach firewalls. Credentials, the idea of having credentials across multiple states on probably different models of machines that are all known by some attacker in China and Russia is absurd. Log trace no while we're looking at logs is absurd. Success no while we're looking at Trump's vote changed is absurd. The ports, there are no ports on the IP targets. This is not. In conclusion, I want to point out one very, very specific thing here. I am not saying that there was no election hacking. I am saying that this particular document that Mike Lindell is presenting to us is not what he claims it is, which is absolute proof.
Each one of these is its own timestamp that is 100% proof.
This document would not pass even the most minimal scrutiny by any quote-unquote cybersecurity experts, this document would not pass as proof in any kind of corporate or real-world environment, and it certainly doesn't pass for proof of election fraud. So proof may exist. It may still come out in the future, and we may be presented with something that could be considered proof, but this document and what is presented in this video is absolutely not proof. And as a final quick note here, just to induce maximum cognitive dissonance in anyone who may be upset over what I'm telling you, I voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020. I wanted Trump to win. The only difference is I'm an objective observer, and I'm not emotionally attached to the outcome.